Hi again, this video we're going to be talking about rates and unit rates. So in our last video we were talking about ratios, and a ratio, if you remember, was just a comparison of two different numbers. So a rate is a special type of ratio. It's also going to be comparing two different numbers, but it specifically will be a ratio that compares two different numbers that have different units. All right, so a ratio can compare anything. It might do like the number of blue M&Ms to the number of green M&Ms. That is a ratio because it's comparing two different things, but they're all M&Ms. So it would not be a rate, all right? A rate has to have different units. So a rate is something more like this example here. So a car travels 100 miles in 2 hours. So notice that we're comparing miles to hours. Those are completely different. One's a measurement of distance, one's a measurement of time. So this becomes a rate because of the different units. So a rate is a special type of ratio, basically. All right, so ratio, much broader term, includes a lot. Rate is just a certain type. All right, so just like ratios, they can be written as fractions. They can be written with the word to, or they can be written with a colon. So for our purposes, we're going to use the fraction most often because it's easier to simplify, and that's what we're going to be using a lot later on. So again, you can write this 3 different ways, but I'm going to just show it to you as a fraction. All right, a car travels 100 miles in 2 hours. So I could rewrite that as 100 miles, okay, over 2 hours. And you can abbreviate, that's fine. All right, so this would be an example of a rate because these are different units. Okay, a non-example, let's put this over here, a non-example would be like 3 green M&Ms to 2 red M&Ms. Okay, because these are the same, okay, just a ratio. This, because they're different, a rate. It's also a rate. Okay? All right, so we want to write the rates in simplest form. Sorry, I'll let you write. I know I write fast. So I'm going to rewrite this as 3 inches of rain in 6 hours. So I'm going to write the 3 inches over the 6 hours. And because it says to write it in simplest form, I'm going to treat this like the fractions I did earlier and just see if there's a number that will divide into both of these. So these are both divisible by 3, both of these numbers. So now I'm going to rewrite this as 3 divided by 3 is 1, 6 divided by 3 is 2. So it's 1 inch in 2 hours. And I can write it like this, but a lot of times you'll see it written with a slash, 1 inch to 2 hours. Okay, it's still a fraction. It's just another way to write the fraction with the slash. All right, and the second example, I'm going to compare 45 toys to $90. So again, notice these are both rates. This was a rate, inches and hours, toys and dollars, because they're different. So if I simplify this, I'm trying to figure out what number can I divide into both these numbers. So this is ending in a 5 and this is in a 0, so they're both divisible by 5. But I know that 45 will divide into 90, so these are actually both divisible by 45. So I'm going to go ahead and do it that way. 45 divided by 45 is 1, so I have 1 toy. And then 90 divided by 45 is 2, so $2. So again, I'm going to write it like a fraction. I can write it this way, where I have a numerator and denominator on top of each other, or I can write it kind of in this form here, 1 toy, and then do the slash to $2. And because it's dollars, I can use a dollar sign. All right, and number 3, I have 42 watts used in 5 seconds. So I'm going to keep the same order. So 42 watts, that goes on top, over 5 seconds. And I can abbreviate seconds. And this time, if I look at 42 and 5, I'll notice that neither one of these are divisible by anything in common except for 1, the number 1. So that doesn't really help me simplify. So I'm going to just leave it as a fraction, or I can rewrite it sort of like this, 42 watts for 5 seconds to 5 seconds, like that. All right, so you have rates. Rates are special ratios because they have different units, all right? But you also have special rates. And a special type of rate that we're going to be using quite a bit is the unit rate. And a unit rate has a denominator of 1 unit when the rate is written as a fraction. So a unit rate, special type of rate, so it still has different units, but the denominator is always a 1, okay? And the denominator is the bottom part of your fraction. We also call it the UNO rate because it kind of, it starts the same thing as UNO, right? And UNO means 1 in Spanish, okay? So UNO rate, unit rate, and that kind of helps us remember that we're looking for a 1 when we're looking for the unit rate. So in this example, 100 miles in 2 hours, this is what we used at the beginning to show that this was a rate because we're comparing something different, miles and hours. But it's not a unit rate because if we rewrote this as a fraction, we'd have 100 over 2, okay? And the denominator has to be a 1 if this is a unit rate. But if we simplify this, all right, if we take the 100 over 2 and we divide by 2, then we end up with 50 over 1, all right? So 100 miles in 2 hours is the same thing, or simplified, is 50 miles in 1 hour. All right, and if you rewrote this as a fraction, you would see 50 miles over 1 hour. Okay, so this denominator here is a 1. That's what makes it a unit rate. Or if you write it sort of in the same form, 50 miles with the slash. And then what you're going to see a lot of is that they don't always even include the 1. So you would say, we don't usually say 50 miles in 1 hour. We say 50 miles per hour. All right, so that word per, start listening for the word per. That's going to mean 1. That's kind of your clue that you're working with a unit rate. All right, so let's just practice identifying unit rates, remembering that it has to have a denominator of 1. So if I look at this one, 45 words per minute. So if I say per minute, how many minutes am I talking about? Just 1, right? 1 minute. This is really just, they didn't write the 1 because we're just used to saying per minute. So is this a unit rate? Yes, the 1 is in the denominator, so this is a unit rate. We're going to circle it. So remember, per minute means 1. All right, in this one, I have $225 over 5 days. So is the denominator a 1? Nope, it's a 5, so not a unit rate. Here I have 18 songs for over every second. So every second means how many seconds? Well, just 1, right? Every second means 1 second. So is the denominator a 1? Yes, it is. So this would be a unit rate. 1 dog for every 2 people. Now this can be a little tricky because if you're just looking for a 1, which some people, if you skip over if you just think UNO rate, you might see a 1 and think unit rate. But remember, it has to be in the denominator, and our denominator right now is a 2. So this is not a unit rate because the denominator is 2. All right, and then the last example, we have 95 cars each hour. Well, each hour is how many hours? Just 1, right? So they don't always write the 1. But it means 1. Each stands for 1. So this is a unit rate. It's in the denominator, so that counts. All right, so let's practice some unit rates. To find the unit rate, you must divide. All right, so a lot of times you'll be given a rate, and then you'll have to change it into a unit rate. Remember, the 1 must always be in the where? Where did we find it? In the denominator. And so the directions say to write the following rates as unit rates. All right, so I've got 15 inches of rain fell in 3 hours. How many inches of rain fell in 1 hour? So when they're asking me about 1 hour, what they're asking me to do is find the unit rate. So I'm going to first write this just as a rate. So as a fraction, I'm doing 15 inches over 3 hours. Notice, again, I'm keeping the order of my words the same. Here I'm going to do 15 inches in 1 hour. And so what I want on bottom, right, is the 1 hour. So how do I change 15 inches over 3 hours into something? I want it to be something over 1 hour. I divide. So I just top in, bottom out like we've done before. 15 goes in, bottom goes out. 3 will go into 15 5 times. All right, so this becomes 5 inches over 1 hour. So now it's a unit rate. I don't have to, I could divide both, but the top and the bottom by 3. That's another way to get 5/1. But unit rates can always be found by just dividing using Taibou as well. Again, I don't have to write it this way. I can also write it as 5 inches like this per hour. Right, so unit rate, it's understood, right, when you do the slash per hour, that means 1 hour. And number 2, there are 64 ounces in 8 cups. So I'm going to write 64 ounces over 8 cups. This is a rate because these are different, but it's not a unit rate because this is not a 1. So in order to change it to a unit rate, if I'm finding the unit rate for every cup, what I'm wanting is this to be 1 cup on bottom. All right, so the way to do that is to divide. So if I divide top in, bottom out, then 8 will go into 64 8 times. So this leaves me with 8 ounces over 1 cup. And again, I can rewrite that as 8 ounces per cup. Okay, the per cup just means 1, even though you don't see the 1 there. A dragonfly can travel 18 miles in 30 minutes. How far can the dragonfly travel per minute? So per minute means they're asking for a unit rate. They want to know for 1 minute. So I want to make sure my minutes are on bottom. 18 miles over 30 minutes. So they need to start on bottom. And I'm trying to change that to something per minute or 1 minute. So in order to do that, I divide. And remember to use Taibou. So top in, that's 18. Bottom out, that's 30. All right, so in this case, can you divide 30 into 18? No, 30 is more than 18. So I'm going to put an X here to remember that. And then when that happens, I add a decimal, bring it up, add a 0, and keep going. So 30 will go into 180. I know 6 times. 6 times 30, or 6 times 3, right, is 18. And then because of the 0, I have a 0. When I subtract 180 minus 80, I get 0. So this becomes 0.6. So on top here, I have 0.6. So 0.6 miles per minute, or 0.6 miles over 1 minute, or I can write this as 0.6 miles per minute like this. Okay, both of these are considered unit rates. And then number 4, the last one, Jim bakes 4 cakes using 36 eggs. How many eggs does he use per cake? Now this one's kind of tricky. So what am I wanting there to be 1 of? 1 cake. And if it's a unit rate, where does the 1 need to be? On the denominator. So this is one of those cases where they kind of switch things on you. You want the cake to be in the denominator, and you want the eggs to be on top. So make sure your numbers follow your words. All right, so I have 36 eggs for 4 cakes. Okay, and I'm trying to figure out, all right, well, how many eggs for 1 cake? In order to do that, that's a unit rate, I'm going to divide. So if I do top in, bottom out, I'm dividing 4 into 36. Hopefully you know that's 9. 4 times 9 is 36. When I subtract, I get 0. So this becomes 9 eggs for 1 cake. Or again, I can write that as 9 eggs per cake. 1 cake. Okay, I should have been boxing my answers, so I'm going to go back and do that. And I could use either one of these, but I'm just going to box one of them. All right, so kind of as a review, we talked about ratios last time. That's when you're comparing things. A rate, special type of ratio, it just makes it just means that you're comparing something that has different units, so something like miles and hours. Okay, not something that's the same, like M&Ms and N-minutes. All right, so rates like ratios can be simplified. And then we have an even more specific type of rate called a unit rate. We call it an UNO rate, just to help us remember that the unit rate always uses a 1 in the denominator, in the lower part of your fraction. So if you need to find the unit rate, remember you're dividing, all right, and then you need to keep the 1 in the denominator. So depending on what they're asking for, like per hour or 1 hour, that means that that's the number you want on bottom. So you would set up your ratio so that hours would be in the denominator. Okay, see you in class.